Well, good morning, everyone. I hope all of you had a productive first day back yesterday, and I want to welcome you to this morning's presentation on equity and social justice. But just briefly, before I introduce our presenters, I'd like to make a few brief comments by way of introduction, if you will, because I firmly believe we are in the middle of a defining moment in our history. And I believe that we have a role in that to speak out against racism, injustices, and the oppression that many of our students face and have faced. And I go back to the summer when we watched them take part in protests where they joined other individuals of a wide variety of ethnicities and faiths and backgrounds in advocating for their own rights, or perhaps fighting in solidarity for the rights of their peers, with the kids maybe that they grew up with, or their neighbors, or even just to better humanity. And they took to the streets, as did many of you, and at times putting your own health in jeopardy. And for me, this was a penetrating reminder that racism exists and that Black Lives Matter. Their activism and your activism also served as a message to us in the Chaffee District of what I think is our moral and ethical obligations to our students and this community as well. And as educators in this district, I will say it's my responsibility, and I believe it's all of our responsibilities, to examine and revise structures in our schools and classrooms that may be denying access and opportunities to our African American students and other students of color. And it's my commitment to you and to our families, and most importantly to our students, that we take the steps and actions necessary to bring about substantial change. In the past 2 years, we've begun to participate in some critical conversations as we examined our internal systems and practices that needed to change. And I want to make it clear that this presentation today isn't a one and done, check it off the list gesture. Rather, it's an update of the work that has been done and a sustainable commitment to, I believe, the work that will continue. And so I appreciate and I'm thankful for Dr. Kirk Oduro's work in the district for many years, and most importantly with the ADL training most recently that most of you have experienced, and his overall leadership in making change. And for Joshua Kirk and his work in this area as principal of Los Osos. And today you will hear his powerful message of experiencing racism firsthand as a student who was raised in our district. And for Dr. Kachaenchai, as she will detail our efforts in diversifying our curriculum and the next steps that will be necessary to continue our professional learning. And finally, for our keynote speaker, Dr. Lynn Kennedy, our own Director of Equity and Inclusion, and a longtime friend, and an individual I've admired for years as an educational leader and as a leader in our community as Mayor Pro Tem for the city of Rancho Cucamonga. So now it's an honor to turn it over to Kirk, who will be speaking remotely from Los Osos with his colleagues. Your turn, Kirk.
All right, thank you, Matt, and good morning, Chaffee staff, and thank you for the opportunity to be able to share with you a little bit of the story of how we've gotten here in terms of our equity work. It's been exciting, it's been challenging, and yet very rewarding. Like Matt alluded to, we have begun to have some very uncomfortable conversations, particularly when it comes to race, when it comes to bias, when it comes to anti-racism. And a lot of these conversations started a number of years ago. And I gotta tell you a story. About 3 or 4 years ago, Dr. Holton called me into his office and asked me a question. And the question was, Kirk, did you have to tell your son how to behave in front of police officers? And I go, well, why, yes, Matt, I had to. I go, as a Black man living in America, my space is a little different. My experiences are different. And I've had to teach my son what to do if he's confronted by law enforcement. And not only that, I've had to tell him that as a Black man, even though he's pretty educated, when he goes to Victoria Gardens with his friends, 5 Black boys that he's grown up with, and a number of these boys, one is at Johns Hopkins University, one is at USC, he goes to University of Seattle. Even though they're highly educated kids, I've told my son, when you walk in that store, and there's 5 of you, they're going to look at you differently. You are going to be seen as someone who is potentially there to steal items. So I've had to teach my kid for the last 10 years how to act and hopefully be safe. And so these are the conversations that Matt and I had. And that led to a bigger conversation with the cabinet. And we talked about racial profiling. And that was a deep conversation. Again, a very uncomfortable conversation. In fact, we watched a clip and it had shown the brutality of African Americans as they came as slaves and how militias were formed to hunt them. And so now we're beginning to understand the experiences of Black people in America. And that was a powerful meeting. A couple weeks later, our superintendent, who is Caucasian, Matt is a white man, brought an article in called White Privilege. And I gotta tell you, we've had a lot of powerful conversations in the Chaffee District. And I gotta tell you, this was one of the most powerful conversations. There was about 20 of us in the room. Some of us had lasting relationships for 20 years. Some of us barely knew each other. And yet that conversation brought so much emotion to the table. We talked about what it meant to be white in America. We talked about what it meant to be Hispanic in America. We talked about what it meant to be a white woman in America. And those conversations were very powerful. At the end of that, I'll never forget, the end of those conversations, Matt gave us a directive to begin to have those conversations. And in part, our conversations with ADL was born. And with ADL, as you know, we now had to talk about implicit and explicit bias. And one of the things that we've learned through our sessions is that we're all biased. In our line of work, it's very easy sometimes to say, I don't want to think about color. I don't want to think about race. It can be exhausting. And truly, sometimes it is. But at the end of the day, what our students are yearning for is for those relationships that say you're worth it. Now, Matt talked about Black Lives Matter, and I'd just like to touch on that a little bit more. When we talk about Black Lives Matter, we are not saying that Black lives are more important than. That has never been the case. It's just an acknowledgement that says, Black people are part of America. We all know the trial and the tribulations from the days of slavery that Black people have gone through. And in fact, there's a study out there by Dr. Joy DeGray who has studied the trauma that has been created by slavery and how it's been passed down to generations in the African American community. And so when we talk about Black Lives Matter, all we're saying is, yes, all lives matter, but we want you to acknowledge us. We want you to acknowledge the Black skin. We are sons and daughters of America too, even though sometimes it doesn't feel that way. And that's the cry. It's not at the expense of other races, not even remotely. It's to say, we're part of the American family. And that's what Black Lives Matter to me. Black Lives Matter too. And so with the conversations that we've had, one of the reasons why we have to continue to talk about this is because every single day in our diverse community, 24,000 kids come into our classrooms. And their parents, they give to us their most precious resource, which is their kids. And they expect us to care for them, to nurture them, and to teach them. And so in this time, as we talk about equity, we want to be able to make sure that we're giving our students the experiences where they can see themselves, one, in the curriculum, in the curriculum. Because that representation builds that confidence in them. We're going to also hear about student voice and how that's important. Like Matt said, this summer, there are several of our students who partook in the protests. And they're going to need a space to be able to voice their concerns and to talk about how much unity we need to have. And those are going to be some important discussions. And we're going to hear how we engage in that. Engage in conversations that prove that we care for our students and we are listening to them. At the end of the day, we are charged. And if you remember from our last big staff meeting last year, Matt charged us to care for our students because every single one of them matters. And he's charged us to make sure that we take care of ourselves because we matter too. And as we begin to work together, we will make sure that our students have the space, have the place to be respected, to know that they're heard, to know that they're loved and nurtured. And so now you're going to hear a powerful story from Joshua Kirk, principal of Los Osos High School.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Dr. Oduro. I'm going to first say I am grateful for the opportunity to be a part of this. This is something that I'm very passionate about in my own life's experiences, but also throughout my career and the impacts that I've seen it have on students' achievement, as well as my own ability to be able to move forward in my educational career. Dr. Oduro finished off by saying that I was going to share a little bit about my story, and I definitely wanted to do so, starting first with some experiences that I've had within some racial situations, racial profiling, things of that nature. And then I will piggyback around and talk more so about my experience as a student and a graduate of this great district. So a little bit about me. I grew up here in the Inland Empire, Pomona, Ontario. I grew up with a blended family. I am one of six. I have 5 siblings and myself. My wife, she is Black as well, but my mom, she's Black. But I was raised also by my stepfather, who's Hispanic. And I had a rare opportunity to be able to see multiple cultures within my household and within different family functions growing up that really allowed me to have an appreciation for the importance of diversity and also the skill set and values that different people could bring. That has been instrumental in my development, and I think the key reason why I'm so passionate about what it is that we're talking about today. After high school, I ended up going to Southern University, which is the HBCU, a historically Black college, the first in my family to go to college. And yes, I've had intense racially profiled situations when I was younger. But when I was in college, I had some that definitely stand out. I can't tell you how many times I've been pulled over for literally just driving home from school on campus or fitting the description of a nearby crime where I was pulled over and even sat down on the sidewalk or thrown down. I've had those situations where I fit the description being a Black man, 5'5" to 6'5", short, long hair, I'm sorry. But nonetheless, I have been in those situations where I've been racially profiled. I've walked into stores where I've had managers and employees follow me around. I've been not convicted, but I've definitely been pulled to the side and asked if I had anything in my pockets. And I'm telling you this as someone that was literally living my life and not even in gear or in appearance that you would consider to be maybe threatening. I mean, I was an Urkel looking guy. So I had glasses on, I had a flat top, and I'm not looking threatening, at least in my eyes, to anybody else. But those situations are real, and they have shaped a big part of what it is that I do, and also it's allowed me to be able to stop and remember it's important to reflect and think about other people's experiences. We're going to talk about that and why that shapes their ability to be able to be successful moving forward. But as we're talking about equity, and in particular right now speaking about being Black in America, I think it's important for us to also remember some of the historical importance of how it's impacted where we are now. Thinking about slaves coming to this country over 400 plus years ago. And around that time was also the first time that racial hierarchy started to be established. And if you look in history, in the first description of Black people That description includes that of dehumanization language, characterizing us as beasts, as creatures, as monsters, as aggressive, as lacking intellectual ability, as lacking the ability to be civil. So from the jump of being here, which we were brought here against our own will, we were already targeted as being inferior. And part of that also allowed for the racial power structure to be justified. So it's important to realize that from the jump, we were already given a description that put us behind. Move forward hundreds of years, we're well aware of slavery, but within that time was also the breaking down of the structure of family. We're talking about hundreds of murders of Black men, Black women, Black children, families being torn apart. You're talking about laws and systems in place that made it illegal for Black people to be educated, to be able to read. Move past the point of slavery and into the ability to be able to start moving forward in your life, and you're still having to deal with the systematic barriers that are in place. Policies, laws, rules, guidelines that prohibit your ability to be able to have fair opportunities to move forward and be successful, which has not been the same experience for some of our other people. So it's important for us to remember that when we talk about these things and we see what's happening in our own community right now, this is nothing new. This is a real challenge. These are real situations, and these are situations that we have been living as Black people since we can remember. Now, I'm speaking personally as a Black man, but I'll be remiss if I did not mention that this impact has also been the same struggle for many people of color and marginalized groups. Yet, those groups are part of our community. They are home. They are the students and the staff members and the families that we see every day. And it's our role as educators to make sure we're doing all we can to do the best job in impacting and supporting the lives of this community that we serve. So moving forward to today, nonetheless, we are in a time that we haven't seen within our own lifetime, with the global pandemic taking place, with the shutting down of our government, our businesses, our schools, and the social unrest that takes place with that. As a result of those situations, we've seen protests take place. Now, these are pictures that I'm going to show you. These aren't pictures that are far from where we are. Matter of fact, this is our school community. These are pictures in Montclair, pictures in Rancho Cucamonga, pictures in Ontario. These are our students, these are our neighbors, these are our families. These are those in the Chafee family boundaries. And the impact that we're dealing with all over has definitely taken its toll. So the protest that you're seeing here is a crying out for the change in what's happening in our lives right now. But also as we move forward, and we saw the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, of Breonna Taylor, and of George Floyd. And the impact of what we've been seeing for years has always been difficult. But when you stop and think about what has happened recently, and most recently with the murder of George Floyd, why this one was so significant, why this one was different, it's important for us to pay attention to. One, in the midst of a global pandemic, it caused the world to stop. We all had to slow down. We were forced to pay attention to what was taking place in our world. If you look 4 years ago, Colin Kaepernick began to take a kneel before a game during the national anthem. His sole cause of bringing awareness to police brutality and calling for change in racist policies and laws. He was actually mentored by a military veteran who gave him the advice that he should take a knee to ensure his message is the focal point and that it's not seen as disrespectful. And at no point was there ever any intent for it to be disrespectful. It was about bringing awareness and sparking change. Yet in the midst of that, the narrative has been shifted and changed as a way to take away from the focus of what really needs to be the progress. But you go from a silent protest, which is 100% constitutional right to do, to taking a knee and bringing awareness to police brutality, to another black man being murdered. And in this way, by the knee of a police officer in broad daylight for almost 9 minutes, while he's calling out and crying out for his life, that he can't breathe. That he can't breathe. And we stop and we hear Black Lives Matter. If you stop and think about history, for Black people, history has shown us and made us feel and has told us that we don't matter. That's what our history and our experiences have told us. But when I talked about slavery, when I talked about the description of us for the first time, when I talked about the breaking down of our families, we have been told that. So for people to hear that message of Black Lives Matter and not realize the impact that's happened for centuries to the African American community and assume that it's a disrespectful notion or statement towards you, please know it has nothing to do with that. It is literally the call for the most basic element of humanity, that you matter, that you're present, that your life is just as valuable as someone else's. And for the fact that Black people have felt that they needed to say this, I really hope people see it. It should scream volumes of the experience of being a Black man, a Black woman, a Black person, a person of color, a marginalized group, an oppressed group in the country in which we live. So it's time for us to look to move forward. So, with that said, going back to a little bit of background on me. Okay, let's go back to 1999. Oh my goodness. Yes, that is me with the big red arrow pointing at me, with the baby face. Couldn't even grow a mustache. This is me at Ontario High School. And I have to tell you, I enjoyed school. I really did. I wasn't the best student, but I enjoyed school. I was active in school. I wasn't the most popular kid, but I was known. I played a lot of sports. I was a 3.0 barely kid, barely. I never took an honors AP class, not one. And if they were giving out letter grades for your SAT score, I would have got a huge enough, but I failed. But I think back about some of my experiences in high school, and I think about the conversations that I have with our own students and at other district events and speaking to other students in other schools in our district. And I compare their experience to some of the experiences I had when I was a student. I recall having a class that I had so much fear of. I had so much anxiety going into this class because I was made to feel inferior by the teacher, because I was made to feel I was dumb and couldn't do the work, because I would receive surprised looks when I asked a thought-provoking question. And this is a class I actually received a solid B in the first semester. But the experiences became so challenging for me that I literally shut down. I lacked motivation in that class. I had no confidence to be able to do it after I had just proven that I had all the capability to do this the first semester and barely passed that class. Barely passed it. But because of that, my senior year, I was back in that class making it up, so I was eligible to go to college. And I think about some of the stories that our students tell us, and I think about the experiences that they've had and how they feel when they explain to me, I'm nervous going into this class. I've been made to feel this way. And please know, these are conversations that I've had within my career here in the district, but even before this, when I was still in the classroom. So here it is 20 plus years, and we're still having some of our students have the same experiences. It's important for us to reflect on it and make sure that we understand that even someone that's in the midst of their challenges still can be successful. I didn't even know we had an AVID program. I was a prime candidate for that. And this brings me to the next point. I remember having teammates on some of my sporting teams, and I remember overhearing their conversations about discussions that they've had with some of their teachers and guidance from some of the help of the other staff. And their conversations were very different than some of the conversations I had. being completely honest, I don't recall having discussions or guidance on application deadlines, how to apply for college, FAFSA, how to do that. I don't recall it. I had no conversations of, what do you think about this honors AP class? You know, what do you want me to do, education? Hey, you should really focus on pushing yourself here. I don't recall having those situations, those experiences, but I overheard them from friends of mine that did. And I think about, when we talk about the achievement gap, is it really achievement gap, or are we really talking opportunity gap? Because research shows when students have those same opportunities and supports and encouragement and resources, they have every opportunity, and they have shown that they could display that same level of success if given the support and the opportunity and the guidance. So I'm fortunate and blessed to say that I barely got into college, but I did. And now we talk about the importance of representation. My K-12 educational experience, I never had one educational leader that looked like me. Not a teacher, not an administrator, not a counselor, not a sub, a substitute teacher. And I remember when I'd have difficult situations, I had teachers and coaches that I could talk to, but never to the point where I truly felt they understood my experience and can mentor and give me guidance on certain situations, especially when it came to that racial discrimination or feeling discriminated against or microaggressions, things of that nature. But when I went to a historically black college university, Southern University of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, it was the first time that I had seen that many black people at one time, to be honest with you. I'd never seen that before, and it was beautiful for me. But I remember walking into my first college class, Dr. Bayon, U.S. History 101, freshman year. And I remember going up the steps of TTO Lane, the building TTO Lane. I remember walking into that classroom, and I remember stopping and looking around, and the feeling that I had of saying that I have never felt like I belonged anywhere in my educational career as much as I feel right now. And I didn't even talk to anybody. No friends, no family in Louisiana. Knew nobody. But the fact that I felt like I can see a familiar face and see myself in my surrounding, that alone was reassuring for me from the start. And my professor coming in and really also adding to that representation. But it wasn't just the fact that everybody looked like me. It was the fact that my professors would also include our experiences in the content and the curriculum so that we can see ourselves in our own experiences in what we were learning. So in my math classes, they're telling us about the impact of the Egyptians and the contributions they made to mathematical concepts. In my science class, they're telling me about the Moors and their contributions to science and the impact that they've had in history. So now you're starting to see the ability level, regardless of the content, because there's intentional, purposeful inclusion of the content connecting with the cultural aspects of the students who they're serving. That part, I think, is so important. And that part does not require anybody to have to be a minority or look exactly like the people that you're serving. That is a key part to the importance of representation mattering. And it's the most academic success I've ever seen in my life. College is supposed to be the most challenging academic part of your academic career. And for me, it's where I had the most success, and for those reasons. So representation is a key piece to the success and development of the work of equity. And it's also important for us to be realistic and understand where we currently are. Nationwide, 80% of teachers across the nation are white females. Within our own district, about 67% of our teachers are white. Yet only 16% of our district students are white. 64.5% of our students in our district are Latinx. Yet just under 23% of our teachers in this district are Latinx. When you're looking at true equity, you always want to try your best to ensure that the community in which you serve aligns with those that are providing the service. And even if that's not possible, that the practices, the philosophies, and the efforts still align to support those that we're serving in our communities. And that's why those efforts are important for us to continue to move forward. But also some more information is why representation is powerful. Stats show that students of color that have one teacher that looks like them by the 4th grade are over 20% more likely not only to graduate from high school, but to successfully graduate from high school and be eligible to attend college or further their education. For Black students, by the 3rd grade, if they have one teacher that's Black, they're over 20% more likely to enroll into a 4-year university after high school. And that number jumps to almost 40% if they've had 2 Black teachers by the 5th grade. Again, the power of representation in person as educators, but also in the work that we do as educators and understanding it's our job to connect with our kids and serve our communities as best as possible. So this guy, babyface Mr. Kirk, was able to achieve dreams and goals that, being completely honest with you, I did not believe when I was that age. Although at that age, I knew I wanted to go in education. I did not truly believe in my heart that I could be where I'm at today. It was not until I had those experiences in college where I began to believe that I was capable and that it could happen. So let's please remember that. So you may be thinking, why is this important? And what can I do? Where can I start myself? Because looking at it big picture, it can seem daunting because this is not a checkbox. This is a true commitment to how we go about impacting the lives in which we serve and our communities. So regardless of what these numbers look like, and I appreciate the fact that there's a commitment from our district to ensuring that we're reflecting on these practices and doing all we can to ensure that we are serving our community with that representation in the classroom. But where do I begin? These are 5 things I believe that each of us can take the time to do. And the first one I think is very, very key. Acknowledge. It's important for us to acknowledge first off that each of us have different experiences. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it is a fact. We do have different experiences. And even within our own classrooms, it's the same environment, but every student in there may have a different experience, and that's okay. But it's important for us to acknowledge that first. One of the things that's important when we're talking about the work of equity, especially when we're having discussions on race, sometimes we have the feeling to say, well, I don't see color. I see everybody the same. Part of acknowledging that there's differences is also acknowledging that we see those differences. And when we don't, by saying we don't see color, we actually marginalize and make those feel like they're not seen. And that's not our intent to do that. But nonetheless, it's important for us to be cognizant of it. Listening. One of the things that I've been very appreciative of during this time is that I've had more dialogue and more conversations with people about these topics than I've ever had. And it's been people that don't look like me. It's been with white people. It's been with other minorities. But it's been honest and open discussion. And the willingness for more people I've ever seen to listen has been so instrumental in me developing, but also my encouragement of the work that we're going to do moving forward. So listen, understand when you listen, you're going to be uncomfortable sometimes, but you'll be okay. I promise you, you will be okay. All right? And don't forget that you being uncomfortable in temporary conversations is nothing compared to the uncomfortable feeling that many live with on a daily basis. So if they can live that and still pursue their goals and dreams to move forward, us as educators, we can stand to be uncomfortable for some temporary moments of discussion and reflection. Which leads to the next one, reflection. Taking the time after you acknowledge that we understand there's differences, that you're listening to the truths of other people, that you're reflecting on your own practices, your own biases, because we all have them. Each and every one of us have biases. But reflecting on how those biases impact what it is that we do, our actions. And a lot of times it's not intentional. It's not, but it's still having an impact. And when we reflect and we educate ourselves and we learn that what we're doing, even if it's not intentional, is still impactful, At that moment, we can no longer claim ignorance. At that moment, if we continue with that behavior, that's because we are now making a decision to do so. And that's important for us to know. Next is educating. We have to continue to put the time in. Continue to challenge yourself and learn with discussions and conversations. Continue, if you haven't done so, open yourself up to some new book reads, some podcasts. Maybe you're checking out some TV station or some programs that you haven't done before. Expose yourself to different cultures and be willing to learn about the impacts and the lifestyles of others. It has nothing to do with your own personal preference, but it allows you to be able to see people through a different lens, a lens of equity, a lens where others are just as human as you. So I challenge you, educate yourself. And then lastly, get to a point where you can begin advocating. It's important for us to be able to not just say I'm not a part of something that's bad, not just say I'm not a part of racist behavior, not just say I'm not a part of discriminatory behavior or anything of that nature, but also that we're a part of the solution. One of the recommended reads, and I want to first give a shout out to some of the schools in our district. I've been made aware of some book clubs that have been happening with parent groups and with some staff. And I've had conversations with members of my own staff, and we've been inspired, and we're actually doing a book club this school year. And we're going to be reading How to Be an Anti-Racist by Dr. Ibram X. Kendi. And shout out to, I believe it was Montclair High School, did a book club read on the book Stamp, another one of his books. I commend you for that, and thank you for the work that you're doing and many other staffs that I've heard those stories across the district. But we're taking those next steps and talking about the discussions and challenging ourselves and educating ourselves on what it truly means to be anti-racist. And one of the descriptions that Dr. Kendi gives is the difference between being a non-racist and being an anti-racist. If you see racist behavior or someone is asking you and you're reflecting and say, well, I'm not racist, that's great. But claiming to not be racist when we all understand we have our own biases and things we need to reflect on, each and every one of us, no one is exempt from this. Claiming that exempts us from the process of self-reflection. And it exempts us from the challenge of doing the work to see this work move forward. When we're anti-racist, we are now saying that we're going to be cognizant of our surroundings and the impacts of policies and behaviors and practices, and we're going to advocate for those policies, behaviors, practices, and relationships with others to be through the lens of anti-racism, meaning that there's equitable opportunities for all. It's being proactive. It's being part of the solution. And so I'm excited about this read, and I'm proud of our staff who's really come up with this idea of us taking this as a charge. And it's an equity focus for our district, and also working in the same capacity on our campus. Last thing I will leave you with is a quote from former Archbishop of South Africa, Desmond Tutu. And he has plenty of famous quotes, but one of them is that in a time of crisis, it's not just a time of anxiety and worry. It gives us a chance, an opportunity to choose to do well or choose bad. In the midst of everything that's going on right now, we've been given an opportunity to choose well or to choose bad. And it is my heart's desire that we realize that as educators, and it being our obligation to continue to be lifelong learners, push ourselves, being uncomfortable, and learn how to better serve our community and our students, that we choose to do so, and that we're committed to that choice to do so. So thank you so much for your time. At this time, I'm going to transition over and hand it off to Dr. Kachaenchai. But I want to thank you. Thank you for your commitment, and thank you for the work that we're going to do to change the lives and create generational change for our students and for our school community. Have a great day.
Thank you, Joshua. And really what I want to thank Joshua for is the honesty and the candor that he shared, and the vulnerability that he shared with all of us when he talked to us about the honest experiences that he's had. And if there's something that I've really felt and seen over the last few months, it's that so many of our colleagues of color who've come out and shared their experiences, not just as students, not just outside of our institution, but here on our campuses from one another. And I can't think of any way to better honor what they've shared with us and the honesty that they've given to us than to demonstrate our commitment to saying we want things to get better. We want things to be better. As Joshua pointed out, we can begin. We can begin this process right now. We can take a look at the work, and we can take a look and we can do the self-work, as Dr. Winston Sheridan reminded me. We can start to do the deep, ongoing work of looking at those systems in our own institutions which perpetuate the racism, which perpetuate the oppression and the feelings that our students have felt, that our colleagues have felt, so that those aren't things that are happening in our schools, in our classrooms, that our classrooms become places, that our campuses become places of safety, of inclusivity, and places that recognize and celebrate and nurture and sustain the diverse experiences that our students come to us with. But I don't mean to say that this is all on the shoulders of our teachers to dismantle these systems. As an institution, it is our moral and ethical obligation to provide the kind of deep professional learning that it requires to take a look at these inequities and say, where can we do and be better? In a little bit, Dr. Kennedy is going to talk to you about some of those strategies, things we can begin doing now in our classrooms to make a difference for students. And what I'd like to do is highlight some of the work we've been doing so we have a shared understanding of where we've come from and the ways in which we're already working together, and to highlight the steps that we're willing to take and do together to make sure that we start moving forward and our students start to feel the shifts in those experiences this year. I know that it is an insane time right now, but I hope that you're hearing from Dr. Holton, Dr. Oduro, from Josh, from me, and from Dr. Kennedy. This is no time to set these issues aside. Our students are going to return to our classrooms having advocated for themselves, having walked the streets ready, and they're going to come to their teachers wanting to talk about these real issues that are real for them, that are real for their families, and that they want to change and be a part of that change. And so what I'd like to share are the steps we're going to start to take to make sure that our classrooms welcome them, celebrate them, and help them learn to advocate themselves in meaningful and constructive ways. Something I'm going to talk about in just a minute is the work we've begun about diversifying our curriculum. I'm so proud of our teachers, and I'm excited to share with you the steps that we've made and the progress we've made in this area. But I'm going to save that for just a minute. One of the key things that we have done, though, is a critical analysis of data. Some sites have begun to take a look at their AP and honors data. Who are those students who are regularly being left out of access to our AP and honors programs? Where are they dropping out? How can we find them? How can we bring them back? How can we hear from them about what are those systems in place that didn't help them move forward and try to reach for those courses that they're academically prepared to take? And how can we mentor them so that they stay in our program? We have sites that are taking critical demographical look at their A to G data, at their freshman success. Who are our kids that we continually to underserve? And how can we do better and find targeted interventions that support those students who continue to be left out of the great strides and progress that we're making as a district? We will continue to take a look because what data shows us is shifts in outcomes, right? It shows those disparities. It shows us some students are truly benefiting from all of the work that we're doing, but not all of our students yet. And we can do better, and we can make sure that we're serving all students so we fulfill our mission. I am so proud to share that some of our sites have already begun doing collective book readings and shared readings. Because again, a lot of this has to do with understanding experiences that are not our own. I speak to you as a white woman, and that is my worldview and perspective. And so if I want to understand what my colleagues have experienced, what my students have experienced, I got to do the reading. I've got to do the learning. And then I need to be able to examine where my own biases play a role in that. Our sites have begun to do readings together, teachers coming together, our librarians leading conversations with our teachers, with parents who are reading books for the first time that reflect their cultural experience and saying, I want this to be different for my son or daughter than it was for me in my own school. They deserve to see themselves represented in the things that we learn and we teach in our classrooms. We need to reflect on our leadership practices. One thing that we heard from our colleagues is that when we come to our principals, when we come to our assistant principals, when we come to one another and say, hey, this has happened to me, we don't always know how to respond out of fear, out of anxiety. We don't have the tools we need to respond in the way that our colleagues are asking us to respond. And deeper than that, we need to learn and make sure we know how to lead our schools through that lens of equity. Right? That all of our principals, that all of our district administration, that everyone on our campuses feels equipped to say to our students and to our colleagues, this is how you make fundamental change. So we know it starts with leadership. We know that we have work to do in that area, and that is absolutely something we are committed to doing. We also know, though, that we can take steps district-wide, but that sites need to have the opportunity to reflect on who their students are, who their staff is, and what those needs are at a more localized level. And so what we want to begin to do, and Dr. Kennedy has already begun this work, is meeting with principals, meeting with staff, and taking a look at our data and saying, where do we on this campus need to grow? What are the steps we can begin to take to disrupt those inequitable systems for our students? And what's going to be most impactful? We certainly don't want to give a one-size-fits-all approach because our campuses are different. And we want to make sure that teachers feel empowered, that leadership feels empowered to make the responses and take the steps that they need for the right work for their students. But something that is deeply personal to me and something I am so proud of is the work of our Curriculum Diversification Task Force. About 2 years ago, Mr. Cronin and I sat down and we were taking a look at the readings, and I appreciate Jim. He said, Jesse, who oversees what selected texts we take? How do we know what our students are reading across the board? And rightfully so, a lot of it had been autonomous. A lot of it was grounded in a system that we had established over 20 years ago. You know, we hadn't done some real critical work of making sure that our curriculum, by and large, continued to evolve and to diversify to meet our students' needs. And it prompted a really powerful conversation that started with our English chairs, saying, why do we read the texts that we read? How are we talking together as colleagues and beginning to adapt those novels, beginning to take a look at the authorship of the pieces that our students are, do our students see themselves in their reading? Are we balancing between classic pieces that potentially we had studied in our own experiences in high school and college? Or were we examining modern, contemporary pieces that would reflect the experiences our students are coming to us with? How are we meeting them where they are and drawing them in? That prompted us to develop a Curriculum Diversification Task Force. And I want to take a moment and highlight the teachers on this team volunteered and said, I am so passionate about this work. I am ready to step forward. And despite the fact that I was doing this work before on my own, or despite the fact that I've had to have these conversations, I'm willing to do this again because I know it's right for kids. And they brought their leadership and they brought their expertise. And we came together and we talked about what are those texts our students need to see? Who are our students? And what do our teachers need to be able to do to begin to bring these works into their classroom and into their curriculum so that we start to impact the kids now? So often when we talk about movements in education, it takes so long to get these things changing. And this is something we could do right now so that the kids that we have don't have to wait 10 years to talk to kids to see how things changed. The next quarter, they could read a book that was reflective of their experience. And we had to do a lot of learning and a lot of talking on the way. And once again, our teachers stepped up and they said, we can help develop these resources. we're willing to put together. Because sometimes I just don't know what's out there that I should be reading. I've got my experience, and I've got families, and I've got kids, and I've got grading, and I've got lesson planning. What are these out there? Help me get those resources. Our librarian stepped up again, and they brought the books together for us, and we started these conversations in our departments about piloting the novels, about which ones we thought would be powerful for our students, about broadening our own education and experience with diverse texts, and then how could we integrate them in a meaningful way. It's not enough to put the book out there, right? We've got to be prepared to teach it. We've got to be prepared to give it the same amount of weight that we would give any other classical piece of literature that we potentially teach in our classrooms. And then we have to be ready when our kids come to us with difficult conversations. We've got to be ready in our classroom to engage in those conversations, to help them communicate with one another. Because if they're not learning how to communicate together, to express themselves, to advocate for themselves, then where are they going to get it? It has always been the role of the teacher to help support students in this way. And we know we've got to make sure our teachers are prepared to do that. I know that this brings a lot of anxiety for a lot of teachers. What if? What if I say the wrong thing? What if I do the wrong thing? What you're doing is modeling for your students the same kind of vulnerability. We can be respectful. We can be honest with our kids. And we can model for them how we too are learning and growing so that they can do that for themselves and they can begin to make these long-lasting impacts on our systems outside of our schools when they graduate. So once again, I want to thank the work of our very first Curriculum Diversification Task Force. The work is going to continue. They've got lots more that they're going to do that we're going to do together. But it took bravery, it took courage, and it took a willingness to lead. And I forever am grateful for the steps that they took together. Finally, moving forward, what are we committing to together? Absolutely professional learning. It is at the heart of everything we do. We've got to take a look at anti-bias work. We've got to take a look at, are our teachers ready to talk about culturally sustaining pedagogy? And are we ready to truly diversify our curriculum? Who's out there? And we're going to ask our other content areas to begin to diversify their curriculum. We're going to ask and we're going to build task force together for all content areas. This isn't only going on in the English classrooms. It's a beautiful moment historically to talk about what is going on outside and how can we bring that into the context of our classrooms. So it's increasing the relevance, the meaningfulness of what our students are learning and what we're getting from one another. In our English classrooms, we're going to continue to do that. We're going to continue. Mr. Cronin sent out messaging to all of our departments. Our teachers have made their selections. Our students are going to read books by people of color and by their experiences in both positive and constructive ways. We want our children and our students to see the full breadth of what it means to be a human in America. The good, the bad, the ugly, the hard, the real, the beautiful. And we want them to see that in the curriculum that they're reading. And I know that our teachers are going to be ready to do that. We've just got to get time and collaboration together and opportunities to learn and grow with one another. But as I said, it's not solely on the shoulders of our English teachers. It is all of us coming together. And those task force that we will build in our other concrete areas, we're going to talk about what does that mean, content specific. What does that mean in our science classroom to have a diversified curriculum? What does it mean in my IM1 class to have a diversified curriculum? And I'm so excited to start these conversations together. And I promise you we are committing to this. As Dr. Holton pointed out, this is not a check it off the list gesture. There's a lot of deep, good work that needs to happen. We know that our budget needs to reflect that value, right? That we need to be prioritizing this kind of professional learning in our LCAP and in our spending moving forward, and it's going to be there. And we're going to do this work together. Teaching and learning are absolutely my passion. It is the passion of our instruction division. Our coaches have been a part of this process all along. I am honored to work alongside of them, just as I'm honored to work alongside all of you. And the first thing we can begin doing, as Joshua pointed out, is we can begin educating ourselves, and we can begin the work in our classrooms right now. Which is why I am so excited and honored to introduce you, for those of you who do not yet know her, Dr. Lynn Kennedy. She's going to talk with you about those things that we can begin doing right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kachaenchai, for that introduction. And good morning, everyone. Welcome back. It is the 2021 school year, and I know you're excited about being back, and I know your students are looking forward to this as well. So just a little bit of an introduction of who I am. I've been in education for 40 years. I actually started out as a junior high school, yes, junior high, 7th, 8th, 9th grade math teacher back in 1976. And I've spent the majority of my career at the secondary level. I've worked as assistant principal, I've also been at the district office in charge of secondary curriculum, and eventually I retired in 2012 as superintendent. Went back to work, unretired, because Ted Alejandre asked me to work on a special project at the county level for the Alliance for Education. So I went back to work in 2016 and then retired again, one more time, in 2019. I have not gotten retirement right. I must say something a little bit about me. Maybe my personal background. I'm a Southern girl. I was born in Louisiana, but I did grow up in the Inland Empire. I went to elementary school, high school, I went to college, as well as postgraduate school in the Inland Empire. So I'm very familiar with the demographics, the community, as well as what the expectations are for our community. And I'd like to thank Dr. Holton. Very, very courageous conversation that he had with all of us this morning. It takes a lot of courage to address issues that are very much hot topics, if you will, especially now. So I'd like to thank Dr. Holton as well as the Chaffee Board of Trustees for investing in you as educators, investing in this community, and being willing to have these conversations. So I wanted to start with this slide. We are Chaffee. I am an advocate. I am a community champion. I have always been one of your biggest cheerleaders. About 3 years ago, I wrote an op-ed piece about the success of the Chaffee School District, closing the achievement gap, A through G completion rates, preparing students for college and career. I've lived in Rancho Cucamonga for 40 years. Most of my friends have children who have graduated from Chaffee schools. So I am part of this community. I am Chaffee. We are Chaffee. Although I've held a lot of different titles, the one title that I cherish the most in my career is that of teacher. I have a heart and a passion for this work. So my role with you, with Chaffee, is to walk alongside of you and to partner with you in the equity work. 3 goals today. 1, a unity of purpose. 2, create a sense of urgency. And number 3, I want to drill down on the objectives that your superintendent talked about this morning. Give you examples of what you can do and some commitments that you can make. So we want to start out with unity of purpose. Now, more than ever, we need unity. Now, more than ever, we need to rise above the noise. There is polarization, divisiveness, frustration, fear, financial insecurity. How do we rise above that noise and focus on what unites us, our unity of purpose? There is more that brings us together as educators, as professionals, than what divides us. There is more of a purpose to our work, and that is our students. We need to come together. Our sense of purpose is our children, the children that we work for and serve every single day, making sure that all students are in an environment where they feel valued, supported, Now more than ever, we need to create that space where they are safe and free and cultivate that learning. Now more than ever, as we come back to this school year, we need to be ready and have that sense of unity. And what's really great about a high school district, and when I was at the high school, I took this process so seriously, and so did everyone on our staff. What unites us in this school district are some guiding documents and principles, starting with WASC, accreditation, that every single high school goes through this process and makes commitments to what they're going to do to ensure that that high school is fully accredited, to make sure that that process is so important, because if it wasn't, we might as well be handing out Xerox paper as students go across the stage. So what we do every single day means something. So I took a few of the criteria out, and I want you to take a moment and read through that, focusing on the red, bold words. So I'm just going to take a few of those out based on multiple sources of data, not just grades, but we're looking at the environment. What's the culture like? Do you have any data on your school culture? Do you have any data on what programs students are accessing? What type of students are accessing those programs and activities? Making sure that the school leadership and staff monitor and refine. Just an asterisk, so as we're going through these slides, all students, that means we're looking at it continuously through a lens of equity and inclusion. Equity and access to curriculum, that criteria. So what type of courses are students taking? The honors and the AP courses. Who has access to those courses? And are you looking at the data to ensure that all students are encouraged to participate and be challenged to take courses that are a little more challenging than the regular ed? D1, reporting accountability process. Student performance data, analyzing that data as a guide to what you're doing on campus. School culture environment. Take a look at that. Criterion, again, focusing on the bold red wording. Continuous improvement, developing a culture of trust, professionalism, high expectations for all students. Continuous means just that. That document should not come out every 4 or 5 years just before you get ready for a visit. These are guiding documents. And when you look at those documents, they have success indicators. So they don't just give you the criterion. They tell you what it looks like, exemplars on your school campus, and what data to collect, what multiple sources of data to collect to see if you're meeting those criteria. Personal, social, emotional, academic support systems. That all students receive this support. The WASC document gives us a chance, that's one blueprint of flying 50,000 feet above the noise. Now more than ever, this document should be a living document on your campus, a unity of purpose. So let's take it up just a little bit higher, 75,000 feet. I got this from CTANEA, Professional Code of Ethics. Take a look at Principle 1. Our commitment to our students. And I really believe that education is such a higher calling. If teaching was easy, we'd never have a teaching shortage. Never have a teacher shortage. Anybody could do it. We'd be pulling people off the streets. But I believe that there is a higher calling and there is a way to do this job that is so much more important than maybe we sometimes realize. So take a look at that last sentence there. In fulfillment of the obligation to the student, the educator. I'm not going to read to you. You can read it. But as you read, would you please think, process about this commitment, this sense of unity, the professionalism that we all bring. Where are you? Aren't these great reminders for all of us? Doesn't it inspire you to be the best teacher you can be for our students? Just as a reminder of what we do every day, what you do every day. This higher purpose, this sense of unity that I'm talking about, leads me to the second goal today, and that's creating a sense of urgency. Right now, day one, when you come back to school, you might even have 2 day ones. The day one where it's a hybrid model and you're teaching remotely, then another day one when hopefully all of our students will be back on campus with us. That sense of urgency. And why? Why now? Why is Dr. Holton challenging us to do it differently? Why is there an intentionality about this year? Not a check in the box, one and done, but a commitment to the process and the work. Why is that? Because shift happens. Okay, somebody just woke up and said, "What'd you say? What did you say?" No, I won't say it. I said shift happens. What does that mean, a shift? If you know how to drive a stick shift, you know what that means. If you use a computer, you know what that means when you hit shift. There's going to be some kind of change, action. Shift happens. Let's give an example, the obvious one first. Coronavirus. You talk about a shift. Sheltering down, running out of toilet paper, a hand sanitizer costing more per fluid ounce than a tank of gas, people fighting in the grocery store over paper towels and masks. I'm not wearing one right now because there's actually nobody in this room. So I'm not wearing a mask, but I have one somewhere. And so wearing a mask, you talk about shift, doing things differently. And then on top of that, if that wasn't enough, the social unrest that emerged during this time and a refocusing on Black Lives Matter. And I'm just going to hit pause for a minute and just go off script a little bit and say something about Black Lives Matter. I know Dr. Oduro talked about it briefly this morning, but I know it's a hard concept for a lot of people to truly understand. And so I just, maybe this, if I can give an example, I kind of took some notes. I was doing research, and I started writing down names. And what if these were names of some of your friends, people that you knew, relatives that you had first-hand experience? And what if it was a name? It wasn't Black Lives Matter. It was Dontre Hamilton matters. Walter Scott matters. Freddie Gray matters. Sam Dubois matters. Terrence Crutcher matters. Jamar Clark matters. Tamir Rice matters. Ahmaud Arbery matters. I just started with the list, and it goes on. So what if there were names? If we put those names on a poster, and every time we started writing a name, the font would get smaller and smaller and smaller, and pretty soon you couldn't read it. But what do they all have in common? They all happen to be African American or Black. And so think of those as names, as people whose lives mattered. And then put Black Lives Matter. It's not saying nobody else matters. It's like paramedics showing up on a scene and they run to the person who's the most injured. Does it mean the other guy over there doesn't matter? His life is not important? No, there's a sense of urgency because this life is bleeding. This is crucial. This is critical. And I think that is the message that Joshua is talking about, that Dr. Oduro is talking about, and that your superintendent is talking about. Yes, certainly, but don't discount the fact that there have been injustices. And just because it has never happened to you or anybody you know, I guess you should be happy. That's a good place to be. But can you find it in your heart to be sad for those that it does happen to you? That compassion, that empathy, that it does exist. And I'm happy that some people have not had to experience that. Anyway, just wanted to put a pause there, say a few words about that. So the shift happens, change happens. And it's not the change that does us in. It's not the curve that kills you. It's your failure to make the turn. Not making the adjustments, ignoring the fact that this exists doesn't make it go away. Nobody's judging you if you don't understand it. We're trying to come to a place of understanding and a willingness to learn. There have been other shifts, and maybe if I give you a couple more, you might be able to relate to that. Hashtag #MeToo, LGBTQ, the policies, anti-discrimination policies, your work environment, what you can and can't do, what you can and can't say. The fact that this movement came about is because of continuous oppression, nobody listening to voices. Their voices didn't matter because women didn't have the power. People who had a different lifestyle were not allowed to share and be that person. Shift happens. And you know what happens when we don't make the shift? I took a couple of newspaper headlines, and it might be too small to read, but people who are unwilling to make the shift or make that turn at the curve. Here's just one. CrossFit former CEO says something stupid, if you will, if I can say that. Doesn't think, makes a comment, and now he is no longer the CEO. Didn't make the shift. Acting as if the environment has not changed, not being sensitive to that environment. Here's one, a coach. He happened to be cleared. He said, did something he should not have done. They did some investigation, and he was cleared, but the damage to his reputation and what he had to go through as a result of that. And nobody wants to be that guy in the newspaper or that woman in the newspaper. Remember, it's not the curve that kills you. It's the inability to make that turn, to shift. Let's go to objective number 3. Drilling down on the district objectives and goals that Dr. Holton laid out for you. Starting with the first one, and I am going to read this because it is important. Relationships matter. We are in a relational business. We don't work with car parts and widgets. We work with children. We work with our colleagues. We work with people, parents, community. We are in a relational business. Relationships matter. The relationships between colleagues and the relationships between teachers and students are fundamental to ensuring that equity work can occur. I'd like you to look at a video.
So I'm always trying to come up with ways that we can let everyone from outside see what's going on inside Westbury High School, specifically the relationships that we develop with our students here. So we've come up with an idea where our teachers are going to tell the students how they're inspired by them, why they love them so much, and why they come to Westbury every day.
So I've been asked by Miss Monahan to take pictures of things things that we love and someone that inspires us. So I chose you, Ludresh, because you always have a smile on your face and such a positive attitude, and you've just overcome so many hurdles, and I'm just really, really proud of you. So I was wondering if I could take your picture.
Yes.
So Mary and Miss Monahan asked us to take pictures today of people or things that inspire us and make us happy to be here doing our job. And of course I picked you because every time I see you, right, you're working for something. You're so smart, you're so talented, and you deserve all of the success that you have right now and all the success in the world. And I'm really grateful to get to know you, not only as a student, but as a person. So can we take your picture?
I choose you because you can't help but to smile from ear to ear daily. I love being around you, and your gregarious personality is infectious. So I was wondering if I could take your picture.
Y te escogimos a ti porque sabemos que el inglés es nuevo para ti y es muy difícil para ti. Y vemos que tienes buenos grados y quieres salir adelante y que haces orgulloso a tus padres. ¿Podemos tomarte la foto?
Lauren, I just want to say you inspire me. You're awesome. Every day I see you walk the halls, and I just want to say that you give me inspiration. And I want to say you're awesome. And is it okay if I take your picture? Okay.
You were always very helpful to me when I first came to campus. You're a very kind person, always willing to do anything I ask and to help other people. And make me proud that I'm at Westbury and that I'm a teacher, that I'm an educator here. So is it okay if I take your picture?
Yeah, sure.
Just stand there, put your hand out. Stop embarrassing me. So I've been asked by the principal to take pictures of the things we love and someone that inspires us on a daily basis. I choose you because you're a beautiful person inside and out. You're a diligent worker, and you inspire me to be better every time I see you.
When I first met you, I was so impressed with your story. Coming from another country and Italy and all the languages you know just really impressed me. But more than anything else, your personality, you're so friendly, you're so respectful, and it's really impressed me that you've been able to earn excellent grades while you're here, and how well you've transitioned into our school and our community. Can I take your picture?
with support.
Hi, TJ. So I've known you since you were in elementary school, right? We go way back. I was your principal in elementary school. Okay, and I'm your principal now in high school. And when I came to Westbury, I was very excited to know that you were a student here. And I just want you to know that you inspire me every day. And I love coming to school and seeing your big smile and know that I'm going to get a big hug from you and a big welcome. So I'm so excited you're here. Can I take a picture with you? Okay.
I hope that video inspired in you that unity of purpose, as well as a sense of urgency to see how important you are to the students. And just my teachers sharing that, the emotion and the appreciation and sometimes surprise that students have because they don't expect that from their teachers. But let's make that, let's be different this year. So what are some things that teachers can do to create better relationships with their students? I interviewed several students, current students, students who have graduated from the Chaffee School District, students that are attending college right now, 1 year, 2 years in to college, different ethnicities, not just all African American students, but a variety of students. And this is what they've given me. These are examples, words from their mouths. And they're positive statements too. You might recognize yourself as a teacher in some of the statements that this is what my teacher did. So these aren't criticisms. These are things that teachers have actually done and how the students respond. And it shows that they care about relationships with their students. So see if you recognize yourself. And if you don't, maybe there's something that you can do and incorporate. I know my teacher cares about me when. So I won't read it, but please read for yourself. Those last two, if you have multicultural clubs and activities, they like to see you there. If you pop in for a few minutes, just to let them know that you care and you want to hear their voices. There's some other examples. Now this first one, I thought that was very powerful. The young man that shared that with me happens to be Asian American, and he's in college. He's starting his second year. And he said that impact trumps intent. So your intention, you say something and it offends a student. Oh, I didn't mean that. That's not what I meant. You took it the wrong way. I was just kidding. Honestly, and I'm going to be pretty transparent with this, I found that sometimes people say things and then when they find out it's offensive, they want to not own that comment. I wasn't serious. That's not what I meant. You took it the wrong way. It's your fault that you didn't understand that. I was just joking. That's not the impact that you need to understand. Mean what you say and say what you mean and be sensitive to that. We're not comedians. We can have a sense of humor, meaning we can laugh at ourselves, but jokes are usually at someone else's expense. I thought that was very powerful, and he explained it just that way. Another student just graduated. He said, we know teachers are smart. They're the teacher. But it really does make a difference when a teacher says, I'm going to grow with you, and there may be some things I learned from you this year that I didn't know. And I'm willing to be vulnerable enough to learn from you. Flexibility and compassion in terms of assignments, homework. And I know there's that, deadline's a deadline, but I don't know how many of you have actually not filed your taxes at the right time. Deadlines are kind of deadlines. Yeah, there's a consequence, but there is some flexibility in life, and students want you to share that same flexibility in your classrooms. Leaves out personal opinions, feelings, politics, sticks to the curriculum. So, what are 2 things that you're going to do this year that's going to intentionally improve your relationship with students? We know that's an objective that your superintendent has. We'll talk a little bit more about how that's going to be monitored this year. But what are 2 things you can do? Let's go on to number 2 that Dr. Holton mentioned, and that's student voices matter. Teachers should create classroom communities which honor students' voices and experiences so students develop constructive, productive skills of advocating for themselves. Listening to different voices that our students have, experiences, letting them learn for themselves, and to be able to come back and tell you whether or not you were right or wrong, but to give them that opportunity. So how can we, teachers, incorporate and honor student voices? Again, these are examples from our students. Their experiences are their experiences, and allow them and acknowledge that when they share. We need to cultivate lifelong learning, and that comes from students being able to share different opinions and to learn from one another, as well as from the teacher. This last one, again, a student who's now in college. I asked him to explain that to me a little bit more. He said in his college classrooms, the professor provides an atmosphere where there can be an exchange and disagreement without people becoming disagreeable. And aren't we creating opportunities to learn for our students to go into college and career? That if they're in a workplace and someone is a different party, has a different opinion, they shouldn't break out in a fight and an argument and be ridiculed in the workplace. You respect one another. You work alongside of one another. And that's very important in healthy relationships. Diversity is our strength, not our weakness. So what are 2 things that you're going to do and incorporate to honor student voices this year? The last one that Dr. Holton talked about is professional learning is key, an opportunity to learn and grow together. So, you don't have to be sick to get better. You have to acknowledge, though, that you can do better and be better for our students. We're growing. You don't get to coast. You know which direction you're going when you're coasting. We want to do better and do it together and have the same starting line. Consider this ground zero, that we're starting together this year. Intentionality, purpose, a sense of urgency that this is work we're going to do together. There's going to be a survey that you'll take in a few minutes or later on today. You're going to use that data. There's going to be aggregate data for the district as well as site disaggregate data so that you all can build site-based planning and make personal and professional commitments. So we talked about unity of purpose, creating a sense of urgency, and more specifically about what you can do this year to implement the goals and objectives that your superintendent established. The outcomes, using that survey data to build site-based equity work, IEPs, individual equity plans, and your personal commitments. And remember, this is not a sprint. This is a marathon. This is hard work. It's a process. We're starting together and we're going to end together. Our students are chafy. Our parents are chafy. Our community are chafy. I'm chafy. We are chafy. Thank you so much for the opportunity to spend time with you this morning, and I look forward to working with you throughout the school year. Have a great year.